passed an overwhelming bipartisan majorities, and those bills sought to shore up our public health system by providing what's called PPE, personal protective equipment like masks and gowns and special machines to help folks breathe who were put into intensive care. And we also undertook a major economic program to help the unemployed by extending unemployment and adding $600 a week. Unfortunately, that program has expired, and we're fighting about how to renew it, or if we can renew it. We started a new program called PPP for small businesses. That pumped almost $800 billion into new loans, many of which could be forgiven for restaurants, retailers, mom and pop operations, as well as some industries. And that's helped over 100,000 small businesses in Virginia. But it's not enough because there are still millions of small businesses needing assistance, without which they may have to close their doors. With respect to racial justice, we also passed a groundbreaking bill, the Justice and Policing Act. It was largely written by the Black Caucus in the Congress that will curtail certain practices by the police, require training, require accountability, create a database for somebody who's been found to have violated the norms of safe policing, so that we have a database on those individuals and then not rehired. That's awaiting action in the Senate. And finally, the House passed the HEROES Act in May. And that's an even bigger bill, a fifth bill, that would provide $3.2 trillion for extending unemployment benefits, for providing even more help for our public health systems, for preventing evictions, allowing for mortgage forbearance for people who find they're unemployed or can't meet their obligations, so people can stay in their houses, providing a daycare, providing food assistance. Here in Virginia, for example, in 1 year, we've gone from 9% of the total Virginia population being defined as food insecure to 22%. Almost 1 out of 4 Virginians is food insecure now. Those are numbers that rival the Great Depression of 1929. So we need to be providing more assistance to save the economy, to save small businesses, to protect the American public in terms of their health and welfare, and to provide assistance to families in need, especially the unemployed. We can talk much more specifics. I got a whole rundown of how it would help here in Prince William, and I will give you the number. In the HEROES Act, let me just end with this number. What would it do for state and local government? Well, it would really pump up. We provided $150 billion to state and local governments. In the CARES Act, which was not enough, that provided about $3.1 billion for the state of Virginia and about $82 million for Prince William County. But in the HEROES Act, we'd provide $875 billion, $500 for states and $375 billion directly to localities. That would translate over a 2-year tranche to $176 million this year additional to Prince William and $88 million next year. For the town of Occoquan, Earnie, it would mean $358,000 this year for the town and $179,000 next year for the town. Dumfries would also, of course, benefit from that, but they're not part of our discussion tonight. And let me end there, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you for that, Congressman. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank you already, obviously, for everything you've done. As you said, the CARES Act has been an immense, as you said, it's only a first step, but we were able to give quite a bit of the money that we got with our second offering of CARES Fund money directly to the school system. Just last night of our Board of County Supervisors meeting, we approved $20 million to our school division. Obviously, it still falls short of what they need to make sure we're keeping everyone safe, whether it's our educators, our students, what have you. But it's gone a long way to help us weather this storm, and we could not have done it without you, Congressman. So I appreciate that.
And I should have added, we also, over and above what I described for state and localities, there's another, I think, 150 billion for schools around the country. And obviously we would benefit from that as well in Prince William.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Congressman. Mayor Porta, your opening remarks.
Let me start by thanking Supervisor and Congressman Connolly for including me in this. One of the things I know about each of these individuals is that they understand local government is on the front lines of so many things. Congressman Connolly came up through local government, and over the years, since before, well, going back more than a dozen years now, we've been able to share stories about the local government experience. Congressman Connolly, I should mention to those who don't know, particularly those who are newer to the Occoquan area, is actually responsible for us getting funding for a warning system, a siren warning system in the event of a problem with the Occoquan High Dam, which is just a mile to our west. He also was instrumental in securing some funding for us that enabled us to improve our sidewalks in the residential area along Washington Street. So he's been with us from the beginning and a big supporter of the town. Supervisor Boddye also has reached out right away from the start on his in his term as a supervisor and has helped us with a number of things. He was instrumental in getting us some CARES Act funding, with which we've been able to offset some of the COVID-19 related expenses that have incurred. We've also been able to give some grants to our local businesses who've suffered as a result of the funding Supervisor Boddye secured. He also includes us in things like recently, he invited us to participate in a screening of Good Trouble, the documentary about the late, great John Lewis, which we certainly enjoyed having here in Occoquan. So both these individuals really understand the challenges that local governments face and have been very, very supportive of us. What I will say to amplify on that theme before we go into the discussion is hopefully for folks to keep in mind that oftentimes we can think of these national problems in a manner that doesn't really affect us. We think about them, we observe them from the outside, and they often don't seem to affect us directly. COVID-19, I think, certainly has changed that for a lot of people because it affects all of us. People also, I think, understand now more than they did before the issues we have with racial justice in the country, because if they haven't experienced that themselves, they almost certainly, at least in our area, know someone who has concerns about that or has experienced it. And so it really does highlight that in any community, no matter how small, if the community is diverse, you are going to have national issues impact you very directly at the local level. And I think that has the two things that I just mentioned have really brought that home to a lot of us. And I'd like to encourage people to keep that in mind as they're interacting with their neighbors and their friends and their colleagues, and try as much as we can to maintain an attitude of empathy, folks, because it's very likely that if you haven't experienced it yourself, your neighbor is experiencing some sort of suffering or turmoil, and we are all in this together. So with that, I'll look forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Mayor Porta. As you see, everyone here tonight sees, we have a good partnership on the federal, local levels between myself on the Board of Supervisors, Mayor Porta in the town of Occoquan, and Congressman Connolly up in Congress. And this is how we feel that good public policy is made, when we're all working in tandem, rowing in the same direction, working for our constituents, which are all of you, because we're best served when we're having an eye towards you. So Mayor Porta, I appreciate that you ended your conversation in terms of the times that we live in right now for the COVID-19. Congressman Connolly, you also touched upon it. So I'll dive into our first question, which is how can we ensure a safe and effective COVID vaccine that is not rushed through trials? Congressman.
Kenny, how can we assure a vaccine that what?
That is not rushed through trials.
So we just had a statement issued yesterday by 7 major pharmaceutical companies who are engaged in clinical trials of a vaccine, or more than one. They promised they would not yield to any kind of political pressure to rush a vaccine. And we have to make sure that the FDA The Food and Drug Administration does the same. What could go wrong, with a vaccine that's rushed? Well, I'm old enough to remember that back in the 1950s and 60s, there was a drug that was designed to treat pregnancy nausea. So women who experienced nausea, and it was called thalidomide. And in Europe, they did rush approval of the drug, only it had a horrible side effect. It did solve the nausea problem, but it led to gross, grotesque, horrible, debilitating deformities in the babies that were born. And it was a scandal. It was a terrible burden for the families that had to live through it, who had expected healthy children and never knew that there would be side effects. Here in the United States, the FDA did not approve that drug for that purpose because it hadn't been thoroughly tested. And so it was a great example of how the FDA actually worked to our benefit protecting the American public. Now, what could go wrong with a vaccine that doesn't go through the thorough clinical trial? Well, there could be all kinds of side effects. There could be organ failure. There could be a decline in your immunity to other conditions and diseases. It could actually backfire and unfortunately accelerate the COVID-19 progress in the body. So making sure we get it right in clinical trials so that it's safe and effective and does not have severe side effects is absolutely key. And rushing it to mass distribution, excuse me, without those clinical trials is an enormous risk to the American public. And once people, if there were to be a rush and there were to be bad side effects, you're going to lose public confidence in the vaccine itself. So it's self-defeating. There are people with a political agenda who want to see it happen before the election. Most epidemiologists believe that's unlikely to happen. And don't forget, vaccines are of different nature. So some vaccines help lessen the severity of the illness should you get it. Not every vaccine is a cure. Remember, we've been living with AIDS since the early 1980s. We don't have a vaccine to cure AIDS. We've been living with the Spanish influenza since 1918, and the annual flu season is a successor to that flu. We still don't have a cure, right? We have an annual vaccine that can help protect you, and if you were to get it, lessen the severity of the flu so that it's not life-threatening. But we don't have a cure-all vaccine that, we can now, everything's fine. So I don't mean to be a downer, but we have to be realistic about our expectations of what will be developed and make sure it's safe and that it is thoroughly vetted in clinical trials before it goes into mass distribution.
Thank you for that, Congressman. I couldn't agree more. To your point, especially on public trust, there's been a lot of folks that have felt a lack of trust in governments on all levels, especially closer to the top because of how things have been handled in the past. Other issues in terms of downplaying the severity of things, politicizing it, as you said before. So a vaccine is one of those key hallmark moments of any pandemic where people hope they can trust that if they get this vaccine, to your point, whether it's to diminish the severity of it or hopefully one day make it so we can begin to undo the damage and keep people safe and even inoculate, hopefully one day, that they can trust that if they get that, it's not going to cause worse symptoms or maybe infect them with the virus in such a worse way that they could get it organically. So I appreciate that. We are actually helping on our part on the local level. We actually have one of our labs in innovation in Prince William County working to help with trials on one of these vaccines here as well. It broke the news a few weeks ago. We're proud to do that. So it's an all of the above team effort on this. And without folks like yourself in Congress, we could not be getting as far ahead as we are. But as you said, we have to do it right. We have to keep people safe. Mayor Porta, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I mean, other than, we're all at every level are going to be concerned about whether or not, how quickly a vaccine comes out and how effective it is. Because fundamentally, people need to interact. And I mean, this is great what we're doing now here, but there are fundamentally some things that can't be done this way, or that from a recreational perspective, certainly for people's mental health, need to be done in different ways. And so the sooner we can get an effective vaccine, the better, obviously. And that is not going to happen if the vaccine trials are not administered properly. So it's very important that we proceed that way.
Supervisor Boddye, I like to talk about. So if somebody said, okay, we've got a vaccine and it's 80% effective in protecting you, but 20% people are going to get COVID-19 anyhow, it just doesn't protect them. My guess is most of us would say that's a risk I'm willing to take. I'm no worse off than I am now, and I'm 80% likely to be better off. But if somebody said, I got a vaccine and it's 80% effective, but in 20% of the cases we experience severe kidney failure, and you've got to go on dialysis, well, now that's a different risk. And I might not want to take that risk. So getting it right can be a life and death kind of situation, and certainly can impair health if we get it wrong.
Absolutely could not agree more. Thank you for that, Congressman. So to shift gears a little bit to another crisis that has been ongoing long before COVID came along, and I know, Congressman, you've worked quite long on this crisis, the climate crisis. As we know, climate change is the crisis is real. Climate change is real, and it's been with us for a while. And we can actually blame a lot of the, severe storms we had, some of the strange weather patterns, and even some of the, weird disease flows and disease patterns and seasons on the climate crisis. So, Earnie, Porta, Mayor Porta, I wanted to start with you on this one. What do you individually plan to do to curb for the climate crisis and to invest in renewable energy jobs? I think we may have lost the mayor momentarily. So, Congressman,
your photo and audio has died.
Oh, you're back?
Here.
Right. Yes, we can hear you, Mayor Porta. Did you hear the question?
I didn't. You started climate change.
Yeah, so climate crisis. So what are you individually doing in the town of Occoquan to confront the climate crisis?
Okay, that's an interesting question. So we do actually have a very active town council when it comes to these issues. They feel very strongly about the sort of things that local governments can do and that you can do locally for these global issues. So recycling is one of the big things with us. So one of the things we've been trying to do over the years is make sure we're matching up all of our, for example, our trash cans in the public areas with recycling cans. We years ago we brought in with the cooperation of the county. Actually, we brought in a big recycling unit that we keep stored under the Route 123 bridge. It gets a lot of use because although people recycle with their normal trash pickup as well, which the town pays for, we have a lot more than frankly can be picked up by the trash hauler and items that they won't take, for example. So we do some of that as well. We also, I can give you a sentiment that is representative of how our council members feel about this issue. We just opened this new public access free kayak canoe launch ramp. One of the first things one of the council members articulated was that with the signage, want to put up some of the leave no trace signage as well to encourage people who are using the river to use it responsibly. And we participate very actively in those sort of things semi-annually. Cleanups, for example, the Aquan River cleanup, we participate as one of the sites in. We also have policies that we've implemented over the years, like no idling policies for vehicles. One of the ordinances I'm particularly proud of that I drafted, that we adopted, is a native plant ordinance, which I try to live up to as a role model with my front yard, which if I don't control it a little bit, sometimes looks like weeds have taken control, but it is absolutely a positive thing for the environment. So we have a number of, we're a Tree City USA, for example. We participate in that program. as well. And we have several other programs like that that we participate in throughout the year.
Thank you for that, Mayor Porter. I know that on the county level, we've been working on some slightly larger scale versions of everything you just described. Myself, a few months back, we directed staff to begin looking at creating a seed-PACE program that allows nonprofits in the private sector to invest and be able to get private funding for refurbishing their buildings, green infrastructure, things like that. So, we're working in tandem with our partners on the local level in the town to make sure that we deliver things like that. I think you're muted, Mayor Porta, just so you know.
I should give a shout out to one of our as well as our residents participate in these sort of things. And actually, it's a business and community partnership. One of our businesses actually collects plastic bags from town residents who bring them in, and these are converted into benches that they then donate to the town. And so this is done by Patriot Cuba, for example, in Occoquan. And so residents just continue to bring these plastic bags down there, and they recycle those into benches.
I appreciate that. And I've actually seen the bench that you're talking about too. It's really interesting times where we can turn plastic bags into benches, but it's the kind of recycling innovative ideas that we need to cut down on our plastic waste for sure. Congressman, again, I know you've worked a long time on climate crisis, environmental issues, so take it away.
Well, thank you, Kenny. And let me echo what Mayor Porter said. I think we start at the local level. And one of the goals I think every community ought to set is how do we reduce our carbon footprint? So that we're carbon neutral by, say, 2030 or 2040. And every community is different, right? Rural agricultural communities are going to be different than suburban or urban districts. Obviously, in places where we live, as Mayor Porter said, recycling is a big part of that. But retrofitting our vehicular fleets so that they're either electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles, and they pollute a lot less. Planting trees, as Mayor Porter said, really important, believe it or not, and in consuming CO2 instead of polluting. Pervious pavers, paying attention to water policies and controlling sewage, looking at all kinds of things that contribute to that carbon footprint. And there are like a million moving parts, but they actually can take green buildings for a minute. So building a green building is more expensive than building a regular building, but you start to recover the costs in terms of energy savings, say roughly year 7 or 8, and in a building that's going to last 40 or 50 years, the rest of those years, you start actually net saving money. So we want to make the environment also common sense economy, and we can. Using renewable energy resources makes a lot of sense in a lot of communities and can significantly save both in the environment, but also help us, frankly, reduce the need for additional power plants. And so looking at alternative fuels for vehicles and for power plants, really important. I would also say at the national level, we just came up with a major blueprint for getting us to this kind of goal nationally. And it's well worth looking at. But I would start with a couple of things at the national level. We need a government committed to the science that recognizes climate change is real and that man-made contributions to that climate change is real. And we have to reverse the emission of greenhouse gases before it's too late. And we may already have reached no return on, say, storms like you mentioned, Supervisor Boddye, the melting of both Antarctic, Greenland, and Arctic ice. Greenland and Antarctica will raise sea levels. A raise in sea levels will make uninhabitable coastal regions around the world to some degree, and that's where most human beings live. So it's an existential challenge. We've got to join the Paris Climate Accord, which set modest goals for trying to limit the increase in temperature, not reverse it, just limit it. We are the only country in the world now that is not a signatory to the Paris Climate Accord. And things aren't going to happen without the United States showing leadership. So that's the first thing we got to correct. We have to reverse a whole bunch of bad environmental policies that are contributing to global warming, such as reversing the clean power plant rule, reversing certain emissions of toxic chemicals like mercury and lead that get into the air and get into our water. This is to protect the American public. And we know that over time, those kinds of environmental regulations actually save money. They don't cost money. They actually save money. Cleanup money, better processes that are more efficient and also environmentally much more safe. So I think there's a myriad of things we can and must do, but we have to make reversing climate change one of the absolute top goals of the next government for the United States. We've got to join our allies and others in the world, because if we don't do this collectively, it won't work.
I agree. This is a global crisis, and we have to meet it globally. I couldn't agree more with that. On the county level, like I said, we're doing CPACE program. I've also contacted our county staff to begin looking, because as you all know, Congressman, you starting in Fairfax local government, you guys on your side of the fence have the Occoquan watershed. The water district there to help promote clean habits with the tributaries and everything that feeds into the Occoquan Reservoir. Unfortunately, we currently do not have that on the Prince William side. So that is something that I've already engaged county staff with developing, and I'm hoping towards the fall we will be getting our first report on what that would look like. Because to your point, clean drinking water is a public health issue. When we talk about these issues, if we do right by protecting things up front, we're spending a lot less taxpayer dollars, and in the long run, we're spending less having to restore streams, trying to fix what was already damaged. So it just makes common sense, like you said, and it's better stewardship of our taxpayer dollars. So thank you so much for that.
And Supervisor Boddye, just on the Occoquan, I think there are 11 watersheds in Fairfax County. And because of the downzoning of the Occoquan watershed on the Fairfax side of the Occoquan, of the 11 watersheds, the highest quality water in Fairfax County is, guess what? The Occoquan watershed. So it actually worked.
Absolutely. And, as you said, as we talk about development and regulation, stuff like that, upstream in Prince William County, we have the western part of the county that's still developing quickly. If we do the right job, we can definitely protect downstream where our district is, and obviously near the very end where Mayor Porta is counted. So we're all in this together, and I appreciate the work you've been doing on this issue. On to the next question. Something that I know, Congressman, that you have been keeping a very close eye on, much to the flavor of this season, elections. What volunteer work can citizens do to help either voting or get to the truth out to voters in terms of election protection, voter fraud, election fraud? All these issues that we keep hearing about on one side of the fence or the other, what can folks on the ground do to help get the truth out and really help make sure that we have safe, secure elections? And Congressman, I'll start with you.
Sure. There are lots of ways. Obviously, people can get involved in political campaigns. But if you're an attorney, you can volunteer for a voter protection program, which is very organized, and they need lawyers who are willing to monitor the polls and monitor election counting and results, to make sure that every ballot gets counted and there's no slippage or problem, and that voters are not unduly turned away or denied a provisional ballot if they can't quite prove their residence at a polling place. People can also volunteer to be poll watchers and election judges. In the pandemic, we need to replace many people. many of our election judges and poll watchers are of a certain age. And that certain age makes them very vulnerable to COVID-19. They're in the vulnerable group. And understandably, some of them don't want physically to show up on election day because they're taking a risk. And so we need to substitute for them. Now, in my county, here in Fairfax, we were able to plug that hole by actually turning to libraries. Because the libraries are physically closed, a lot of library workers were willing to volunteer to be poll watchers and election judges on election day. And so we were able to make up for that gap. So there are lots of opportunities to do that. You can volunteer, right? So like my wife is involved with 4 groups that write postcards for candidates. And like for my primary, they wrote 16,000 postcards. That is the equivalent of like one full mailing to, countywide, district-wide. So there are lots of ways to get involved. And the number one way is to make sure you vote. And you can vote by mail safely as long as you vote early. Don't put it off to the end. Or you can vote remotely at a satellite. Prince William, I know, is adding satellite voting places, which is finally happening and a really good thing. You can vote absentee in person, or you can drop it off. There are going to be drop boxes. The state just added to that, thank God. You don't need a witness anymore, and you don't need an excuse to vote early under new Virginia law, which makes it easier to vote. So vote. For God's sake, vote. It's so important.
Thank you for that, Congressman. As Americans, voting is one of our most sacred duties. A lot of our ancestors fought, bled, and died for the right to vote. So we should not be squandering that, letting other people decide our destiny, especially an election as important and vital to the future of our democracy as this coming election. I know you're on the ballot, Congressman. Happy to make sure that we continue to keep you there. You've been doing a lot of great work. And in terms of the postcards, those mailers are not cheap. I know you know that. I know that to have an army of folks being willing to write those postcards and get involved in such an intimate way in our campaign, in your campaign this year, is very important as well. So thank you for that. And I could not forget to touch upon that last part, what you mentioned, which is the drop boxes. The language in the laws here in Virginia up until literally a couple days ago was very nebulous in terms of drop boxes. There are a lot of legal issues there, but we can finally have drop boxes in Virginia. So we're definitely going to be looking at that in principle. You had something else you wanted to add, Congressman?
No, I was just going to say that postcard writing group is also doing it for candidates all over the country. So they're doing tens of thousands of postcards, to have their voice heard. And of course, also one can get involved in nonpartisan activity in terms of, your favorite issue. There's lots of activity going on in racial justice. There's lots of activity going on with respect to gun safety and public safety. There's lots of activity going on in terms of other kinds of empowerment for children, for disability causes and the like. And that's another way to make sure, collectively your voice is heard on issues in our political debates and in our campaigns.
Absolutely. The last thing I'll say before I turn it over to Mayor Porta is engaging new folks in the process to be poll workers. You mentioned library folks. Obviously this year, because of COVID, we have a lot of college students that are still at home because they're not going on campus. So we as a county have been beginning to outreach to the students that would normally be down in UVA or up in DC, Georgetown, my alma mater, that Mayor Porta is also fond of as well. Being able to draw upon that new pool of much younger folks, to your point earlier, to help fill in those gaps. So Mayor Porta, take it away.
Yeah, I was going to comment on the voter protection attorney issue that Congressman Connolly raised, because I have served as a voter protection attorney for multiple presidential races, including the last one. And I would encourage folks who are expert in election law as an attorney to be valuable in this. In addition to getting training for this, which can be done online, one of the real services you're providing is that people, when they go in, can get frustrated at a hurdle they may encounter in voting, and it might be a very temporary hurdle. like a name misspelling or something else like that. Voter protection stances, because they can explain to people that they don't need to get, and that there are questions that can be asked, and also, frankly, you have to use a ballot. What a provisional ballot is helpful. So I would encourage people to, if you are an attorney, to consider doing that. I also really would encourage people to volunteer to be poll workers, because there is a real need for that now, particularly as Congressman Connolly mentioned, that we have, frankly, a generation of folks who have really carried the load for a long time and now are part of the vulnerable population with regard to COVID-19. So if others could volunteer for that, it would be very, very important and very, very helpful. And of course, I'll always end with encouraging people to get out and vote, because really, Congressman Connolly and our state representatives, delegates, and state senators and other elected officials have really made it as convenient as they possibly can, really, in this time frame, to vote. So I really encourage people to make sure they do that in November.
Lawyers on voter protection, but also poll watchers, can make a difference in facilitating elections. I'll give you an example. We had a precinct in Prince William County in the 2012 election that had several machines go down, and there was no backup. And the lines formed, and it was a cold day in 2012, election day, presidential. And this was a minority majority precinct. And a lot of people taking off an hour. They had their kids with them. It was freezing cold outside. And we were able to persuade the election judges, because there was no school that day, to open up the school and let people wind around the corridors instead of being outside in the cold. And we brought them, blankets and water and encouraged them to stay, right? Don't give up. Well, that wouldn't have happened without people being there and knowing their rights and being able to negotiate with the election judges to allow that to happen. And so even little things like that can make a big difference in terms of guaranteeing people their right and opportunity to vote.
Absolutely. And, every year we try to make voting easier, not harder for folks. And here in Prince William County, we've actually also going to be committing some of our CARES fund money to propping up that infrastructure for voting, because we know that, folks who are coming in, we have to keep them safe too. Social distancing, mask wearing, other things of that kind. We have to be able to keep people safe in the precincts, both absentee, early, and on election day. So we're making deep investments, and the Congressman mentioned it earlier. We're expanding the number of satellite voting precincts this year, so we can expand the franchise as much as possible. So on to, we're getting quite a few questions in the chat in regards to absentee voting. So I'm going to switch over right quick to the chat there to see what we have there. Let's see. Okay, there is a couple of questions in regard to requesting absentee ballots on time, people being able to early vote in person, those kinds of things. Most of those are sort of very granular questions that we can address sort of piece by piece in the chat itself, but very good questions. So I'll kick it back over to our main questions here. This one I'll start with Mayor Porta here. It's in regards to town investments. The town of Occoquan does a lot to promote its businesses. How does that support of businesses help improve the quality of life of folks in the town, and what kinds of services are being provided directly to town residents?
That's a good question, Supervisor Boddye. Actually fortunate in Occoquan to be one of those jurisdictions where a real estate tax in other words, what on residential units, actually contributes a lower portion of revenue to the town budget than does the revenues generated by businesses. So between commercial real estate tax, meals taxes, B-poll, license fees, they all together actually exceed the amount of revenue we get from residential real estate tax. So it enables us to keep our tax base or our tax burden on residents lower than it otherwise would. Now, of course, with a town, candidly, if you don't have a business district, you really don't have a town. Then you're fundamentally a subdivision. But for those who are familiar with our budget, the vast majority of our budget goes to residential uses. These are things like the amenities we have, like River Mill Park, for example. And we have a series of events, as you know, in River Mill Park that are really everybody is welcome, but they're really geared toward town residents. And those include our movies and our concerts and things like that. I mentioned earlier that we just put in this kayak launch ramp. And this is something, actually, I had a newspaper reporter interviewing me about this earlier. And this is one of the things that for more than a decade, people in Occoquan have been interested in, which is, if you're a historic riverfront community, it's really a tragedy if your residents don't have free public access to that river for recreational purposes. You know how rivers are with small communities now. All those industrial uses from history are no longer around. Really, the asset it provides is a recreational asset. And so I've lost count of the number of people who have said to me over move to Occoquan, and we really wish we could have access. Just Friday, we opened it up. And of course, we have our town docks. We spent a lot of money, as you know, a few years ago, preserving the woodlands along Tanyard Hill Road, and that's now a park that we own. And actually, we have a trail workday coming up September 26th, where we're starting the building out of the trail there. Of course, the other services are the sort of amenities that you would expect. Many of these predate me, and I'm appreciative of predecessors who had the foresight to put these things in place. But the entire historic district, for example, doesn't have an HOA. It's the town government that has to manage that. And those brick sidewalks and gas lights are all things that we pay for. Of course, we do the things that people would consider mundane. Trash pickup is paid for by the town, snow removal on alleys and things like that. And of course, we have our own police force, and our police spend candidly the majority of their time dealing with residential and commuter issues. So as you know, you and I have talked about that for quite some time. So if anybody's familiar with our budget, they'll know that we actually put very little into our business community. We get a big bang for the buck out of it, I have to say. And we are limited, of course, in what we can do for them in terms of what we're legally allowed to do. You and the Board of Supervisors did help us out with that CARES Act fund relief that you gave us. That did enable us to put together a grant program, micro grant program for town businesses, very similar to what the county did at their level. And so that's
Thank you for that, Mayor Porta. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I appreciate your commentary on the trails and the park that you mentioned, because one of the biggest projects in the Occoquan District is the Occoquan Greenway, which once completed will connect the town of Occoquan all the way to the McCourt building, and there'll be trails and sort of lateral use parks and recreation all along the way. It'll be publicly owned, so it'll be free for the public to use at their leisure. And yeah, absolutely. It must be nice having most of your tax revenues come from commercial as opposed to the residential side. You know, with us, we're still working on getting that to be a more balanced thing, because right now we're still at about that 85%, 15% level. We want it to be closer to 20, 25%. Was our moonshot goal of 35% commercial versus residential tax revenue. But you know, we're working on that. We're doing deep investments in our homegrown businesses. We have an excellent economic development director in Christina Nguyen, who we snagged from up near the Beltway, who was instrumental in the HQ2 deal. So we have all the right tools, the right recipe. We just need to keep investing in our businesses in the right ways to get that good return. Congressman, I know you've done a lot for local businesses, small businesses on your level. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, it's always a balance, but having a vibrant economic environment allows you to do so much. And both of you just talked about that, right? So it allows you to do green infrastructure. It allows you to do environmental protection. It allows you to have those parks and amenities because you can afford to do them. It allows you to have a strong social safety net in human services. It allows you to, have a robust first responder system in fire and rescue and police. So it's a balance. If you look at my other county I represent, this other one where I live, we've created 650,000 jobs. And that has allowed us to do all kinds of things. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't problems with that. There's congestion. There's, accommodation for that many workers, but it has given us an enormous economic base. And I'll give you one example, Tyson's. In replanting Tyson's, when it's fully built out according to the new plan, taking advantage of Metro, it will generate an extra $1 billion a year in local tax revenue, with which we will finance schools and parks and recreation centers and senior centers and all kinds of other programs. $1 billion. So, that partnership can be very creative, and, you've got to make it work for you so that it's environmentally friendly and we're not overdeveloping, but getting the balance right can be a very successful enterprise. And I think that's really the key. And I would say about Prince William, if we're ever going to get to creating, being something other than a net commuter suburb, we've got to have mass transit in our future. We've got to look at Metro coming to Prince William County. And I've been a long champion of that. And the first likely candidate is that Route 1 corridor. But in any event, it's something we've got to talk about. It's something we can't be afraid of, because if we're not included in Metro, we will severely limit our commercial future, and that's our tax base.
Absolutely. I appreciate that, Congressman. And like you said, it is a balance. We have to make sure that we're developing the right kind of businesses, being environmentally sensitive to that. But we know that if we do the right job, we are creating more opportunities to invest in all the things that matter, whether it's public safety, like you said, parks, recreation, schools, the backbone of our society. And you brought up where I was going to go with our next question, which is Metro. I know you and I, Congressman, have talked a lot about the Metro Blue Line, bringing it down to Prince William County. As you said, that would be a huge economic boon to the county and taking us to that next level. And transportation in Northern Virginia, we cannot have a conversation in a town hall without talking about transportation. So starting with Metro, but going beyond Metro to other mass transit. Congressman Connolly, I know that one of the biggest things that defined America for generations was our transit network, the railway system, the highway system. So what are you working on the congressional level to bring us back to that place where we are a world leader?
So one of the things we've done, in addition to the CARES Act and the HEROES Act and the Justice and Policing Act, we passed a $1.5 trillion infrastructure bill. Again, it has not been acted on in the Senate, where good ideas seem to go to die. But I think it is a blueprint, I hope, for the next administration. And it would pump a lot more money into mass transit. I think we in Prince William County may have an opportunity with that bill to finally, jumpstart the conversation about a Metro investment for us. Because I couldn't agree with you more. If we don't do that, and you look at the population projections, the congestion we're going to experience 20 years from now, which is not that far away, is going to be hellacious. I mean, it's almost unimaginable. And the quality of life will deteriorate for Prince Williamites. And so, trying to we try to want to have different forms of development that allow us to live near where we work. We want more, pedestrian-friendly communities. We want more neighborhood-based retail, but we got to understand that we also need to be transit-oriented. And so investing in, VRE and PRTC and a future metro, I believe is just critical for our future. But I think we really kick-started the opportunity to do that with federal financing infrastructure bill we passed, which is the biggest infrastructure bill in decades. And I believe the Republican Senate is unlikely to act on it, but I believe next year could be a different story. And I think we could have some very exciting possibilities for a community like Prince William County.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. And a few months back, we also had the landmark announcement about expanding the Long Bridge, which will obviously help us a lot and start to look at the idea of bi-directional VRE during the day, having weekend coverage, hopefully to help, like you said, build that multimodal idea behind it, which we desperately need. Here, I know this is a much larger scale than you have in your small area of the county, but I know transit, making sure that folks get to and from the town is important. And I know you guys deal with a lot of traffic issues in the town of Occoquan. So do you want to touch upon transit and traffic a little bit?
So I mean, obviously people being able to get to Occoquan is great. Now we tend to feel that people are able to get to Occoquan. Getting through or around Occoquan that is the biggest issue for us. I know you've been working, and some of your predecessors have as well, on improving some intersections outside of the town of Occoquan, which really once that is done will do a lot for us. Because candidly, I mean, I always like to say everybody is welcome in Occoquan, and I try not to refer to people as cut through traffic, but rather commuters or others, because these are public roads that everybody is entitled to use, and we're hoping they're going to come back and visit Occoquan and enjoy the amenities. Our residents count on, we frankly can't them all ourselves, and so we really need people to come to visit Occoquan for us to be able to sustain those things that we as Occoquan residents use. But traffic issues outside of town at these intersections are a big deal for us. If you were to go out there right now and look out my window, you would see part of what we're dealing with. And it's not to anybody's benefit. Frankly, the folks that are the commuters that decide they need to go through Occoquan rather than stay on Route 123 and go up Old Bridge at the intersection there, but instead feel like it's better for them to go through Occoquan and try to get Old Bridge up there where there's not a light. They're not enjoying that process either. So ways of relieving congestion responsibly are obviously important to us. They are important, I think, to any community that suffers from or deals with traffic congestion. One thing I'll note too, which I think people don't realize, and I will say, our police force does a pretty good job, folks, of getting folks who are running through stop signs and speeding and that sort of thing. Let me tell you, they don't enjoy doing that, but there's a particular reason that they have to do that. And it's not just because the majority of our residents demand it, but a lot of people don't know that everybody who lives in the town of Occoquan has to go down to our post office to get their mail. Mail is not delivered in the town of Occoquan. So this is hyper local politics for you folks. But the reality is when the afternoon commute is taking place and people are coming through Occoquan, our residents are having to walk their dogs or walk down to the post office or drive down to the post office to get their mail because they're getting home, from work at those times as well. So running stop district is, and that our police officers really enforce that pretty strictly or try to.
If I could just add to that, Mayor Porta, I often cite Occoquan because in many ways, you're the one rural post office I've got in my district. and the centrality of that post office as a place where people go to get news. They can post things for sale. They can see what else is going on in the town. They can exchange gossip, and it's really a feature of the community that while some people might view it as inconvenient, their mail isn't delivered. On the other hand, it has served to really create a sense of community in Occoquan that is unique in my district in Northern Virginia.
Absolutely, Congressman. Thank you for that. And to Mayor Porta's point earlier on those outlying intersections, one of the questions was posed in here, and I'll speak to it very quickly. The 123 Old Bridge intersection. That's been a long since much heartburned intersection in our district for quite some time. My predecessors have started work on that. Also, the auxiliary lane on I-95 to get that bottleneck widened out so it's not such a traffic conundrum. We're working on both of those issues. We had a lot of folks did a lot of work over the past few years to make sure that we have a solution for the 95 part. But I am currently working with our transportation department locally on that 123 Old Bridge intersection, which incorporates that sort of flyover from I-95. We're reworking some of the designs for that to make it more effective while not disrupting the businesses that are in that intersection, because we want to maintain that balance as we discussed earlier. But we know that that's a huge focal point of a lot of the traffic issues for not only the town of Occoquan, but basically the entire sort of northeastern corridor of the county. So we're still working on that. And as soon as our folks continue and finish the designs, we'll be applying for state funding through ETA, Smart Scale, and some of the other funding structures we have to get the money in so we can continue to do work in that area. We only have a couple minutes left. So Congressman, I wanted to finish with you and give your final remarks, but I wanted to leave you with a question that someone posed. Once Biden and Harris are sworn in, what do you think are 4 or 5 legislative priorities?
Boy, there's so much to do, but I think we talked about the environment. I think one of the first things President Biden would do is to sign the Paris Climate Accord and have the United States join. I think a second priority, not necessarily in this order, would be to restore protection called DACA for the Dreamers. These are 700,000 or 800,000 young people who came to the United States when they were little babies or children. They didn't have a choice in the matter. They're grown up as fine Americans, and they need to be protected. They can't be under the threat of uncertain legal status and at risk of deportation. I think he would also have a list of regulatory measures that this administration has overturned or reversed that directly affect public safety and health, from particulate matter and the environment, coal ash regulation. We've got at Possum Point, we've got a coal ash right here in Prince William County. And, we were making real progress in getting those things regulated, evaluated, monitored, cleaned up, and all that got reversed. I mentioned the clean power plant regulation that got reversed. Well, that affects asthma and respiratory illnesses, clean air versus polluted air. It's a real hazard to public health. It's also a retrograde way of providing energy, right? Most power utilities want cleaner plants. It's more efficient. It's better for them. It costs less to operate. The dirty coal-fired power plants are clunkers that need to be retired, and most of them want and welcome the incentive to do that. I know that's true here in Virginia with Dominion Resources. So it's a full plate, and I think in the first 100 days we're going to look at our infrastructure agenda I talked about. We're going to look at racial justice, and especially racial justice in policing, with the bill we passed in the House, and a myriad of other subjects. But I think it's going to be a transformative period of time. I don't think it's just a matter of going back to the status quo ante. I think so much has changed in America with the COVID-19 virus and with the economic collapse, we've also obviously got to take economic measures to protect the vulnerable, the unemployed, the food insecure, our children. That's going to be lots of hard work. But I think we also, in those challenges, we have opportunities to make, to transform the United States and make us the great country we're intended to be.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Congressman. Like you said, a full plate. We've discussed a lot of issues, and as you alluded to, this pandemic and these crises that we've been through during this year have laid bare a lot of things that we always do really to be true about the inequities and the shortcomings we've been memorial. And as you said, hopefully, thankfully, after this next election cycle, just as we've done on local and state level over the past couple of years here in Prince William and in Virginia, we'll be able to finally get to a place where we're not, like you said, not only just going back to how things used to be, but really pushing the ball forward and creating a more just and equitable society that we know we can be. And that takes, your level, our level. So that's being said, for any final thoughts?
Did you ask me, Supervisor Boddye?
Yeah.
Sorry, you cut out on me there.
Yeah.
No, I want to thank you both for allowing me to participate in this. I mean, I always like to showcase Occoquan. We really do depend. Really do depend on a larger community to support us. We simply can't operate in a vacuum here. We're simply not large enough to do that. So we don't survive without the support of others outside our community, and the two of you have actually been great partners. So thank you for your efforts to date, and I continue to look forward to working with you.
Absolutely. Likewise, Mayor, Congressman, it's been a pleasure having this hour plus with you. I hope we can do this again sometime soon. Hopefully,
Sure.
Like I said at the outset, we're best served when we make ourselves accessible to our shared constituents. We are here to serve. So that being said, I know we covered quite a few questions and discussion topics, so we did not cover them all. Please feel free to reach out to our offices. We are here to answer your questions. Any final thoughts, Congressman, before we wrap up?
No, it's just a privilege to serve with you and Mayor Porta. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your service to our community.
Likewise, sir.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe and keep up the good work.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.